Without a healthy planet, you can't have healthy people. This is science. We know what's going to happen. Resiliency becomes incredibly important. Do employees feel safe coming back to the workplace? Right? Many of our work environments have things as simple as outdated mechanical systems. I don't think people realize the percentage of neurodivergent people in our population. And what are you as my employer doing about that? It was affordable. Like, these were real solutions. It's not just money. It can save lives. Mental health became really important. We know what those important metrics are, why well is so important. It speaks to everyone's individual needs. If you're not addressing all three of those things, you're really missing the mark. If you're not creating spaces for them, you're really not going to have an effective workforce. It's going to continue to drive organizations to explore and implement solutions that support the whole human, right? Their physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. And then, as I mentioned earlier as well, I think, younger generations are also demanding this. They're not just taking any job anymore. They want to know what the organization is going to do to treat them as an individual.
So if we could pioneer a completely new vision of the workplace, what would that look like? A place where sustainability, wellness, and resilience can extend far beyond the office walls. In this episode, we try to consider that workplace as a living ecosystem shaped by sustainability, wellness, and the urgent need for resilience. Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, where we dive into the seismic shifts redefining how and where we work. From hybrid work and AI to workplace design, leadership, and culture, we're unpacking how the modern work environment is evolving. Hi, I'm Bob Fox, an architect and founder of Work Design, and for years I've been deep in the trenches of workplace design. Now I'm excited to share the inspiration from the brilliant minds who are transforming how and where we work. Each episode features forward-thinking leaders and experts who are reimagining the future of work, environments, tools, and the human experience. So if you're shaping the future of work or just trying to make sense of it, we're glad you're here. Join us as we explore what the F is happening to the office. And we would like for you to be a part of the conversation, so be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm excited because today's guest is Jennifer Berthelot-Jelovic, founder of ASAP, a sustainable production, and a true pioneer in sustainability and wellness real estate. Jennifer was one of the first WELL faculty members in the world and has played a key role in shaping the WELL building standard from the ground up. She's been behind some of the earliest and most ambitious WELL LEED net zero and carbon positive projects globally. She's brought those principles to everything from aviation hangars and housing for the chronically homeless to high-performance offices and large-scale community developments. Jennifer's unique expertise blends policy, psychology, and design to create workplaces that not only function better, but truly support people's health, happiness, and resilience. Jennifer, welcome. I'm glad to have you here.
Thanks, Bob. That was a fantastic introduction. I might just take you everywhere I go from now on to introduce me. So yeah, I'll give you a little background. I definitely took an unusual journey to get here. It was not straightforward. I received my undergrad degrees in social work and psychology, and then a master's in applied social sciences to run nonprofits. And at the time, I was working in sexual assault and foster care, which are two of the most broken social service systems we have. And to be honest, I was pretty bitter at the world. And my aunt asked me to come work on a movie during my Christmas break from grad school. And then at that time, another movie came to Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I'm from. So while I was finishing my master's, I worked on that movie. And when I completed my master's, I decided to move to Los Angeles and work in the entertainment industry. But within about 2 years of moving to LA, I began working for a businessman who had opened a production company. And then shortly after that, we opened a music label. And then in 2006, he told me he wanted me to oversee the building of our new airplane hangar, and it was going to be LEED Platinum. And I asked, what is LEED? Why does it need to be platinum? And why is this my job? I produce movies and music. But in 2008, we not only built the world's greenest aviation facility that was in fact LEED Platinum, it was also net positive. But at the time, we had no idea what the term net positive was. It wasn't in our vocabulary yet. honestly, we were just really happy we'd achieved LEED Platinum for an airplane hangar when everyone else was trying to figure out how to apply LEED to offices. And we were being paid around $14,000 annually from the city of Burbank for the excess clean power we were sending back to the grid, which was really exciting at the time. So, in the downturn of 2008, when everyone else was closing their doors, my boss decided to open a construction company. I moved over there full time and learned how to be a general contractor while being the director of sustainability on our projects. And to be honest, I did not want to learn the GC side of things, but I'm incredibly grateful now that they forced me how to learn to read plans, respond to RFPs, and create project budgets, timelines, and work with subcontractors because over the years, it's really served me well as a consultant. And then in 2012, my boss came to me and said, look, people want to hire you as a consultant and they don't need your GC services. You need to go out on your own and start your own consulting firm. So after 10 years with that company, I started ASAP, a sustainable production. And another interesting thing happened when I started my company was that that same previous boss also had invested in the well building standard and it was being tested on many of our projects. So I was giving them very real and very direct feedback about what I thought worked and what didn't work in the industry when trying to introduce the new standard. But I loved the concept. I love the concept of this new certification that would measure how healthy spaces are for people. I kind of felt like it was what was missing all along on the sustainability side of things. But it took a few iterations to really refine it. So I'd originally thought ASAP was just going to be a sustainability consulting firm, but we very quickly also became the preeminent healthy building consultant as I was one of those first well APs and well consultants in the world.
Wow, that's exciting. What a circuitous path to get to where you are today.
Yeah.
We're really focused on the workplace and how the work environment is changing. And I'm curious to sort of hear more about your perspective. How do you look at these environments? And when you start out with a project, where do you begin?
Wow, that's a good question. Every project is unique. Every client is unique. So there's not a one size fits all model. We really look at what are the client's commitments, what are their goals, what's driving them. And from there that really helps us put together a game plan or a roadmap to what we would recommend for them and then really walk through that with them step by step to make sure that their team and our team are aligned so we can support them throughout that process and ensure that we feel really confident that we can produce the intended outcomes that they're looking for from going through these processes with us.
I think the pandemic really had a huge impact on the whole concept of wellness and well-being in the work environment. And, how have you seen that change over the past 5 years?
Yeah, COVID really changed what workplace means, both literally and figuratively, right? We used to think that everyone had to go into an office or place of work, and that all changed in March of 2020 for us here in the US. We suddenly realized that all these jobs that just had to be done in an office or on site could miraculously be done from home. And instantaneously overnight, our homes became our workplaces, our schools, and the places that many of us spent all of our time for a year or two. But there was also a lot of inequality in this, right? Not everyone had the same luxuries, access, freedom, or ability to work or learn from home. So to some, I think, workplace was home. To some, it was a refuge to escape to from home. And to some, it was a scary place they had to go in uncertain times. So I think workplace really came to mean different things to different people after COVID.
I'm thinking that you work with all types of spaces. So, what really counts as a workplace today? Because I think we've got a huge choice and a large variety of different types of places.
Yeah, and we work with a lot of different typologies and industries. Some people have, specific typologies or industries they deal with, and I don't think there are very many we haven't touched. So when, we were thinking about workplaces and what do some of those changes look like across the environments, right? As I mentioned, like not everyone has the same opportunities and resources. And so for us, what was really interesting after COVID was looking at like there were places that needed to stay open to provide necessary services. I wouldn't have thought about a telecommunications retail store like T-Mobile until they became one of our clients during COVID. And their employees had to come into the retail stores during COVID to ensure the public had working phones, which in this day and age really is a necessity, right? So all of these spaces we had started designing with that had like open workspaces, collaborative workspaces, hoteling spaces, suddenly it might not have been the best option compared to individual offices where people could be in that same place every day and close doors to help mitigate and deal with the transmittance of COVID. So as we looked at spaces, it was very different, right? We had those retail spaces. You might have had healthcare spaces where people were on the front line. And then you had those offices, and maybe offices were a place where people were happy to come to. Maybe people were afraid of coming to those offices. It was also how properly prepared were those offices for people to come back during and after COVID. Maybe they didn't have good air filtration or outdoor air makeup or some of those things that we've learned that help make spaces safer, really. So I think, people have had to start looking at their mechanical systems, their cleaning policies and procedures, their health benefits and sick leave policies, really all of their policies and procedures and maintenance protocols. So it became not just about the spaces, it was also about how people use those spaces, how those spaces were being operated and maintained that really had a huge impact on what is a workplace. And we started seeing a lot of companies starting to support people in their homes, whether it was making sure they had some of those ergonomic benefits like sit stand desks and the right chairs, things of that nature. All of a sudden, offices were homes. It was kind of an office could be anywhere after COVID. And I think that really impacted what that term, again, workplace meant.
Yeah, I feel like sustainability is such a broad definition. There are so many things. Can you define for us what true sustainability really is, and how does somebody in the work environment apply that?
Yeah, I love this question because it's something I'm really passionate about, which is holistic sustainability. You find a lot of it on our website talking about holistic sustainability. For me, holistic sustainability takes sustainability, human health and wellness, and resiliency all into account because without a healthy planet, you can't have healthy people. Our people and our planet are intrinsically interconnected. So it's really important that we address both when we're discussing sustainability. And then when you add climate change to the mix, resiliency becomes incredibly important. So I think sustainability, human health, resiliency, they're also risk mitigation. So when we're looking at the workplace today, if you're not addressing all three of those things, you're really missing the mark and you're not truly addressing sustainability if you're only focusing on one of those.
I'm thinking about the well standard as a business strategy today because I think that healthy people obviously perform better. But, I'm kind of curious what kinds of wellness initiatives or policies have had the biggest impact for your clients and for businesses.
Oh, that's a fantastic question. It's hard to compare which have had the biggest impacts, I think, just because one plus one doesn't always equal two, and the outcomes can have those exponential impacts. And I think different regions of the world have different concepts that might be more important to them, right? In Flint, Michigan, for instance, the water concept's going to be incredibly important. I was on a call recently with the Netherlands, and they were like, why is this nourishment concept important? Like they can't even understand why this is an issue because of the way that they eat and how healthy they eat there, right? Whereas in India, air quality might be the most impactful concept that they have. So I think all of the initiatives and policy having various impacts regionally or based on typology industry really shows why well is so important. It speaks to everyone's individual needs. I do think that indoor air quality is huge. I think that that has a big impact. And I think data is king. I think we'll see surveys and sensors become more impactful as people start to really understand their value and how to utilize their data in meaningful ways. And then we hear those specific stories on projects. We had one healthcare client in the office and they, put a treadmill desk in and he just started going in there 30 minutes a day and ended up losing something like 30 pounds. That was so meaningful to him that his family at home started doing the same thing and others in the office started to going using that treadmill. And then all of a sudden this one person and their personal story caused this ripple effect of others who started taking on their health in small but tangible ways that had an impact, right? So it's like, how can you measure what is the biggest impact is really difficult because I think, again, there's the exponential impacts and there's all of those localized, regionalized, and then personal impacts. So it's hard for me to give you an answer, but I think that's why the 10 concepts of well are so perfectly designed to accommodate anyone's needs anywhere in the world.
You touched on climate change as kind of one of the sort of aspects to deal with. And I'm curious how to help organizations design for climate resilience. I mean, we see things like forest fires and big storms, and there's constant change. So, I'm curious if somebody's developing a new building, Is there something they can do to approach that?
Yeah, climate resilience is a vital component of the work we do. And we also work with a lot of communities, which takes this into account even more so. I remember, I mean, this must have been at least 10 years ago. Sarah and Neff, who had been at Kilroy at the time, like she was talking about all this modeling she had been doing for climate change. And I was like, what is she talking about? It was like a foreign language at the time, but she really saw that it was risk mitigation, right? She always had that foresight about these things. And here we are 10 years later or so, and I'm like, oh, wow, like she really knew where we should be looking. And so when we start with buildings, but especially when we start our community projects, we start asking a lot of questions about the work that's been done during the land acquisition process or that building acquisition process. Has any modeling been done, testing? And one of my favorite examples of this was we were working on a project in the Gulf in Florida. And this was a large scale wellness community. The local building code required us to build to, I think, something like 12 feet above sea level. But we knew better. They'd already had a category 4 hurricane come through this exact area. So our team did the modeling to see how climate change and sea level rise would impact the community in the future. So when John on our team modeled the sea level rise, it turns out that if they didn't build to a minimum of something like 14 or 15 feet, the whole community would be underwater in something like 5 years due to sea level rise. The code doesn't take that into account, right? And so when you think about something like this, something as simple as modeling the sea level rise to know, like this is science, we know what's going to happen, right? As the sea caps melt, et cetera. There's a huge ROI in this, but it's not just money. It can save lives, right? Like if all of a sudden you lose an entire community, you lose people often with that. So it's not just about saving the buildings, but it's also ensuring the lifespan of that community isn't being short, both the lives of the people inhabiting it, as well as ensuring that those buildings aren't lost. Because often during floods, once it's gotten that water damage, it can be very difficult to remediate or, be able to inhabit those buildings again.
I'm curious out west. Well, actually, now it's beyond the west, all the forest fires that we're seeing literally across the country and the smoke that comes from that. Are there things that people can do to help protect themselves from that?
Yeah, I think global wildfires is really relevant. As you mentioned, we just experienced two major wildfires here in the greater Los Angeles area. I was in Australia in November 2019, a few days before their wildfires broke out, and they're becoming more and more common and more destructive. And the first obstacle, I think, in the workplace is like to survive those fires, right? Do they have all their IP stored off site in the cloud? Will they lose their assets, data, inventory? And then if they're lucky enough to survive a fire, are they able to be inhabited after the fire? It's really interesting. I'm on the Verdani Institute for the Built Environment, VIBE, and we recently were judges and sponsors of a contest with the Claremont colleges here in California. It was put on by one of the college students, and the 5 colleges in Claremont were able to be a part of this. And we had 19 teams of 2 to 5 people essentially. And the students were looking at what are the solutions to mitigate the loss during fires in the future. And I was blown away. I learned so much during this day as a judge from these college students. And I would say 95% of what they put forth was actually able to be implemented. It was affordable. Like these were real solutions, some that existed and some that didn't, some that may have been existing in a certain area but hadn't been used for the public or allowed, certain people to have access to databases. And so it was really fascinating to see, that these essentially 17 to probably 23-year-olds or so were able to come in with none of the experience and the fear and the no, we can't do this mentality, and instead came in and they were like, we can do this and this and this. And I was like, wow, why are all these college students not sitting at the table with the city of LA, with the governor, the mayor, with these rebuilding panels, because they really had done their research and had some fantastic solutions. And I think when you pair them up, so I think that that's what we really need to look at, right? Many of our work environments have things as simple as outdated mechanical systems. They're not prepared for major air quality issues. What we saw after, a lot of the fires is that these workplaces are covered in ash or soot or worse yet, toxic materials that burn nearby, and people aren't even thinking about that. So it's like, Do employees feel safe coming back to the workplace? And as we just talked about floods, right? You have mold instead of ash, soot, and burnt toxic materials. So I think natural disasters are becoming a huge burden on society, whether it's a local, federal, global level, they're draining resources and economies. And so designing for resilience for climate change, major disasters it's really a necessity. It's risk management at this point.
I'd like to jump from the global climate to the individual
Yeah.
and talk a little bit about how you see that changing, because I feel like businesses today are scrambling to try to attract talent, but there's still a lot of resistance in terms of some of the management and some of the practices that people employ. And I'm wondering how you see the human experience is starting to evolve, particularly after COVID, and how the work environment was becoming a more healthy place.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's interesting on a lot of levels, right? Especially after COVID, mental health became really important. It wasn't something people were really talking about in the workplace or in organizations. One of the concepts I love most in Well is the mind concept because it focuses on this topic. Research from about a decade ago, I think it was 2014, told us that in 2030, employee mental health would be our number one cost and focus for employers. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit in 2020, and that timeline was sped up quite a bit. And employees want to know now, like their mental health is important. It's supported. And what are you as my employer doing about that? And especially our younger generations. I see this a lot, both as an employer as well as just, someone that works with other employers. Younger generations are really clear about their expectations and how they want to be treated. And Well looks at everything from, maternity leave, paternity leave, time off to take care of a child, a parent, to take care of your own mental health. And, that's maybe one or two features out of, 200 options. Does your health insurance cover therapy? Is there support for survivors of domestic violence? How do you support people who are neurodivergent? I don't think people realize the percentage of neurodivergent people in our population. And if you're not creating spaces for them, you're really not going to have an effective workforce. I think people want to feel welcomed, included, accepted, supported. And we spend a lot of time on our Well projects, pouring over our clients' health plans, their benefits, the various ways they support their employees' mental health. And it's really eye opening. I think the most impressive thing I've ever seen when going through these was we had a client and their portfolio had two or 300 communities around the country, and they actually paid their people daily. So you could opt in to get your paycheck deposited on a daily basis if you wanted to. There were no fees, no deductions in how much you made. And I thought, wow, we talk about people living paycheck to paycheck and the impact that has on certain groups of people. And if you didn't have to actually live paycheck to paycheck and you got paid daily, like imagine the impact, the less like lack of stress, the anxiety waiting for that next paycheck to come. And I think that we're definitely seeing a difference in how employers are supporting and addressing their employees holistically, mind, body, spirit, not just, okay, you get your paycheck and your benefits, right? But it's a lot more than that that's expected. And again, especially from our younger generations.
There's a lot more awareness of neurodiversity in the workplace today. So I'm curious how you see that being implemented in the workplace.
Yeah, this is another one of my favorite topics. And I'm actually neurodivergent myself, so it's incredibly important and personal to me. IWBI has been working with Sargent and others around the world to really incorporate ways spaces and organizations can implement inclusivity for people who are neurodivergent. And this could be everything from lighting, wayfinding, signage, acoustics, the ability to work in various types of spaces and move around, right? Like having a little sound booth or being able to find a quiet space, having accommodations, headphones, different things like that. And I I think that we're really seeing organizations understand that due to the number of people with neurodiversity, it's important if you're not taking this into account because your people aren't going to thrive. They're going to not want to come into work. They're going to choose to work from home if you're not creating spaces as well as the policies to support some of those things that they may need to best be able to work in your offices. So yeah, it's been interesting to see in the Well standard over about the last 2 years. They've added a lot of features So you'll see some of those as beta features. A lot of them fall in that mind concept when we're talking about mental health. You'll see that, but you'll also see it throughout the other concepts as well, right? Looking at lighting, people don't think about things like they put fans underneath lights and then it causes a strobe light. And then all of a sudden you have people that have issues with seizures having to worry about the fact that they might have a seizure in line at Costco, for instance, because they put big ass fans literally under the lights in all of the Costco's. And so, as designers, it's conversations I'm often having. Are you thinking about these things when you're putting them into spaces, when you're designing the spaces? Acoustics are incredibly important, lighting, a lot of those things just have a huge impact on people who are neurodivergent.
Yeah, I think the level of awareness of the neurodivergence has increased considerably in the profession. I think on the human experience side of it, again, I'm kind of curious what you're seeing. The return to office and office, mandates have been pretty popular these days. And I would imagine that the healthy aspect of it, the sustainability aspect of it are all things that are important in terms of getting people back to the office. What are you seeing with regard to return to office and how are people addressing that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We've had a lot of our clients, especially our portfolio clients, really focused on this, right? How do we create a culture that has people want to come into the office? And people have gotten comfortable working from home. Not everybody, of course, has, the same access or resources at home. But a lot of people, they're able to work out. They don't have to commute and sit in the car for an hour to 2 hours to 4 hours a day to get to the office. And so what are those drivers in getting people to come into the office? We've seen clients who have, Wednesday massage day. When you're in the office on Wednesday, there's a masseuse there, right? It's having healthy snacks and healthy drinks available. Maybe there's smoothies or juices there on certain days or every day. People are bringing their pets into the office. So many people got pets during COVID, and all of a sudden they're now expected to leave them at home, which can be a huge issue. So I was recently at an office and it was just full of dogs. And I was like, I don't know that I could work in this office because I would never get anything done because I'd just be playing with dogs all day. Like, I would be more distracted here with all these dogs than my one dog at home. But I think we're seeing a lot of things. I think the things we thought people might want, like a workout space or some of these things, people really they've changed their lifestyles since being home for a few years. And a lot of different organizations and office types have looked at a lot of different solutions. And I don't think there's one size fits all, especially if you look at warehouse workers, right? Like, what opportunities do you have to support warehouse workers as opposed to people working in an office that can just get up and go? There's people on the line that can't just stop and go grab a juice or bring it out to where they work because they can't have food or drinks out there. And so I do think that people are still trying to figure this out. There is not necessarily an answer. We've seen a lot of empty buildings and empty offices, and people are really struggling with this and may continue to struggle with this. How do we get people in? How do we create these cultures? And what is most meaningful to people that have them want to show up and return to offices?
And I think that there's a lot of hybrid work that's still going on, but I'm wondering about the policies surrounding hybrid because the definition of hybrid was very gray in many cases. And I think there was a lot of confusion about who was in the office, when they were in the office, and the various days that people would spend in the office. So I'm curious, from a policy perspective, how do organizations address those kinds of issues?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think it also is a little bit of people want to feel trusted. They have this experience. I just worked from home for a year or two or three or however long they'd been at home. And you trusted me to get my work done, and I did get it done, and I did perform. So now all of a sudden you want me to be in the office 2, 3, 4 days out of the week. And do I get to choose those days? Are you choosing those days? Are you staggering those days for different people? It's actually upsurfing a lot of people's lives, right? There are people that were promised they could work remotely forever and they moved to other cities or they were working in a city across the country. And now all of a sudden they have to decide, do I keep my job and move to where the job is, or do I find another job locally? And so watching these companies kind of struggle with, how do we mandate this? And if we mandate this, are we going to lose some of our best people because they've moved and they're not able to come into the office? Or, it's a huge commute to come into the office. So by the time they get here, they're very frustrated because they've been in the car for an hour or two to get here X number of days. And so they're implementing it in a lot of different ways, right? Some people, it's shortened days so that they're not in rush hour traffic. Some they're staggering days. It could be 2 or 3 days you need to be in the office. I haven't seen really a one size fits all, but I also haven't seen everybody be happy with the solution that they're being forced to come back, right? When they were kind of promised that they wouldn't necessarily need to. But I do think the hybrid is the best solution if you're going to have people come back. At least they feel like they get a little of both, the best of both worlds. They get to stay at home and work from home, which might really help them thrive. But for some people, they're excited to come back to the office. They love coming to the office. And for them, they like having the community or the resources or maybe they have small children at home or, other things that keep them from being able to work in a home environment. Again, I think this has been a really touchy subject for a lot of people just based on what people got accustomed to over the last few years and what they're comfortable with moving forward because they kind of realized they could do this work from home. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, why do I have to come back into the office if I've proven I can do it remotely? So, and there's the culture, right? We do have some clients who have said, especially for our younger workers right out of college, it's important for us to kind of teach them how to work in a work culture, what work culture looks like. And when that's at home, it's a lot harder than when they're in the office. So having them come in a few days a week, we get to mentor them, we get to work collaboratively with them, we get to help them understand what it's like to have that first job out of college and help train them in some of these soft skills that you might not get when you're not face to face on a computer, but that you get from being in the office. And so I think there's the pros and cons of both working from home and being in an office, and people are really trying to balance that.
You had mentioned earlier about the data, the sensors and metrics that people are using in the work environment. How are those being incorporated into work and the way that we're working?
Yeah, so I just did a webinar last week on sensors. They're kind of my most recent obsession, not gonna lie. We're actually recommending sensors on all of our projects for a handful of reasons. I could literally talk about the subject for hours, but I'll direct you to my LinkedIn post this week with the link to the Kaitera webinar that I did with Liam Bates. And we discussed the multitude of benefits of using sensors, especially for well projects. They essentially make well more affordable. They reduce the amount of performance verification testing required and that ongoing annual testing required. But you're also obtaining data 24/7, 365 days a year. And that really allows spaces to make adjustments that can improve human health outcomes in real time. So, as we talked about fires, if there's a fire outside and the air quality is poor, but I know exactly what my air quality is inside, going back to getting people back into the office as well, I can let my employees know or visitors, hey, by the way, it might be poor air quality outside, but the air quality here in the office is fantastic. I'm looking at it right now, or you can look at it on your mobile app. And to be honest, most of us in our homes aren't great about changing filters. We might not even have great MERV filters in our houses, but the buildings may very much be up to date and have great filtration and makeup air and all of those things. And so when you have that data to support what's going on in your space all of the time, it really is a way to incentivize people to make them feel safe and comfortable. And again, to really make adjustments in real time that are then going to result in those better health outcomes for the occupants.
I would imagine it's pretty easy now to collect data from a variety of sources, and there must be just an overwhelming amount of data. What are the metrics that you think are the most important that we should be tracking in the work environment?
Oh man, so two of my favorite topics right now, I just mentioned sensors. The other is surveys. I'm not gonna lie, I used to avoid data, sensors, surveys, all of it. They were scary, they weren't my bailiwick, and they were expensive. But in the past 6 months or so, they've actually just I've become so enamored with them, and how they impact human health and wellness. So as I mentioned earlier, data is king, right? The more data we collect, the bigger impact we can have on those occupant health and wellness outcomes. And I've also realized the ROI and how inexpensive they really are. So I think we'll be seeing a huge uptick in the use of sensors and surveys in the coming months and years as people really start to understand the value and the benefits. But at the same point, this is Like I said, it's not my bailiwick, right? Like I used to think that it was scary and I avoided them. So there are experts that like this is what they look at. They will tell you exactly where and what data we should be collecting. So I'm not going to pretend to know that. I do think that well is spot on. They tell us, what we need to do for performance testing or for sensors, right? So we know what those important metrics are. So whether it's our inorganic, organics, and our air quality, looking, at our all of our, I don't know, I'm like going through every feature and all of the things that we're measuring for. So I think if we look at like the preconditions in well, it's going to tell us what's most important, right? Like at these very fundamental levels. And then you have all of these other optimizations that are like, okay, if you want to go a step further, here's the next things you should be measuring for. And again, whether that's performance verification testing or sensors. And then it's really interesting you bring up the survey side because I know that IWBI is looking at those surveys. How do we make surveys more approachable and usable for clients, especially portfolio clients who can't just take one survey and take all the data for all the buildings and use it together? They need to analyze it building by building to see how that specific building is impacting people, right? And so IWBI, I think, is really looking at that. LEED also has thermal comfort surveys where it's just focused on the thermal comfort. But what I love about Well is it's more holistic. It's looking at a lot more than just thermal comfort. And so I don't know that I could tell you exactly what the most important are, but I do think if you use Well and you use those preconditions and you use what's required in those basic surveys that are required in the community concept, it's a really great basis to start from. And what I also love is that Well has approved survey providers, which means those survey providers know what Well is looking for. So based on all that research and data and white papers that have been put together to say, this is what we think is most important, these survey providers have been vetted or approved, so to speak, from IWBI to say we can meet this for you by implementing one of our surveys. So they've done a lot of the heavy lifting for us. And so we lean heavily on those, sensor companies, the survey providers, and the performance verification and testing agents and organizations to really support us in helping us understand, especially for each client. Like we talked about earlier, which concepts might be most important or have the biggest impact. What I'm measuring and most concerned about in Flint, Michigan might be testing their water, whereas, when I'm in India, I might really be worried about air quality or, during the fires, looking at air quality. So I think it varies from location to location and from each of the climate issues that we have or those risks that might be occurring at a specific time.
So I'm curious in the data that you're seeing, is there anything that stands out that surprises you?
Yeah, what I would say is I'm surprised by how many projects we think have been designed to meet these standards, right? We work with the architects, the engineers, the general contractors, the subcontractors to ensure that like we've got the low VOCs, that we've done everything right. The mechanical systems, should be working at a certain capacity to ensure that we're meeting all of these air quality or water quality or whatever it is and sound acoustics, right? Lighting. So when our clients don't pass these things, it's incredibly frustrating because we're like, wait, we did everything right. How did we get this wrong? But I think it just speaks to how important the data is. Because had we not done the testing, if we didn't have the sensors, if we didn't take the surveys, and we didn't get back, the negative results from those things or the failing of some of those results, we would never know that we didn't do it right. So, we used to do lead projects and we would tell the subcontractors and general contractors that they needed to use these certain materials. Was there any way to guarantee they actually use those materials? No, we had to trust the MSDS sheets they gave us and hope we got it right. And now all of a sudden there's kind of this accountability of like, well, okay, but if you don't actually follow what you said you were going to do, we're going to test that air quality and we're going to measure that there's volatile organic compounds in the air. And we're going to know that there's materials in a certain area that are off gassing. And so I think by having the data be collected in these various formats, it really holds people to account to make sure they're doing what they said they were going to do or what they were supposed to do, even just from the design of our acoustics. We may design things, but not have taken in everything into account in that space, whether it's the furniture, the concrete floors, instead of having carpet, whatever that looks like. And so I think having the testing helps us really square up and make sure it's like the commissioning of a building, right? Having this testing is another form of commissioning. It's making sure that the building is designed and operating the way actually meeting the design intents and operating the way it was meant to.
I've got to ask you, AI is the thing that's out there, everybody's talking about. I'm curious how AI is playing in the sustainability and wellness world.
Oh man, I am so torn on AI. Literally, I wish I had this number in front of me. I just like saw this article that if you say please and thank you to AI, like the impact it has on the environment, look it up. People do not say thank you and please to AI when you're using ChatGPT. I was doing that because I'm just a polite person. Like I'm going to respond to the computer that way. And I'm like literally killing the environment doing it. So I see AI helping with sustainability and wellness. It definitely has its role, but at the same point, I'm like, okay, but what are we doing with the data and what we know the impact it's having on the environment? For me, I'm really struggling with how do we utilize it responsibly? And that word responsible, looking at a lot of various ways we're responsible with it, environmentally, ethically, all of those things. But I do see, even just in my own work, there's certain things we need to do. For instance, there's a lighting guidebook that we need to use for one of our features. Well, typically people don't own that book. It's a very expensive book, but I can ask ChatGPT exactly what the requirements are for that feature for that type of space. And it just spits out the foot candles and the Lux for me instead of having to hire an engineer. No, don't hate me, engineers, because like, right, I've just replaced a 10, 15 minute of work for them. But quite frankly, it's a lot more convenient for my clients, especially when they have an existing building and they don't have an engineer that's working for them and they would have to go get someone to do 15 minutes worth of work that now we can use AI to do that for us. And so I think we are seeing certain tasks that are being done more quickly and more efficiently, which is fantastic. But again, I also wrestle with the impact of that on the environment, having these massive, servers and data warehouses to collect it all. So I very much avoided AI and resisted it for a very long time. And then suddenly started jumping on board recently and was like, wow, look at this. This is absolutely fantastic. And it helps me with my sustainability and wellness work all the time. It also helps teach me when I have a question. Like it's a really great way to get an answer about something I just might not be educated in, whether it's around, something engineering related or general contracting related or something I need to talk to an architect about. So I think it also becomes a translator between roles and responsibilities sometimes, just to help level the playing field so we can have a conversation where we're speaking the same language.
Well, that sort of leads into my next question about what's the future, what's next for high performance, healthy workplaces? What do you see coming down the road?
Yeah, well, I think that sensors and surveys data, right? That's definitely up there. AI. I think going back to holistic sustainability, having that environmental health, human health, and resilience all wrapped together. I think there's a lot of organizations that are still trying to figure this out for themselves as we watch mandated reporting globally really force organizations to take inventory and report on what they're doing to benefit the people and planet, it's going to continue to drive organizations to explore and implement solutions that support the whole human, right? Their physical, mental, and spiritual well being. And then, as I mentioned earlier as well, I think, younger generations are also demanding this. They're not just taking any job anymore. They want to know what the organization is going to do to treat them as an individual, take care of their personal needs, their commitments, to create a culture where they feel valued, like they're not just a number or someone that can be replaced tomorrow. So I think the confluence of all these factors will continue to drive human health and well-being in the spaces, the organizations, communities, and cities where we spend our time. But I really think it's, data and sensors and AI. We're going to see a lot of that driving our buildings and communities and the work we do in sustainability, human health and wellness and resiliency.
For an organization that's just starting out today, thinking about their next iteration of their work environment, and they want to try to address the sustainability and the health and well being concerns, where should they begin?
Yeah, I would say reach out to a sustainability and wellness consultant, someone that has, probably a decade of experience because they've watched the industry grow and expand and seen some of those trends and the ebbs and flows, and hopefully also have experience and know to how to implement things cost effectively. They've made the mistakes, they've seen the mistakes made previously, so you're not going to be that test project where they make the mistakes, and make sure that when you're sitting down with them, that they're really getting in your world, right? They're not just trying to sell you a solution, but they're asking you a lot of questions. They want to understand what are your commitments, what are your goals, what outcomes are you looking for, and make sure that they have a tool belt full of solutions. They're not just trying to sell you one solution, but they can really support you in anything and everything you want to do. And I'm not going to pretend that ASAP is the experts in everything, but we partner with the experts in everything. So we know what we're really good at. And if we see that a client has a need that we don't fulfill, we're going to introduce them to the person that we know is best in the industry to support them with that goal, right? So if it's a certification or we don't do ESG and GRES benchmarking. We have partners that do that, that we pass that work to and have our clients work with them. We're not going to pretend to know everything. There's not really too many companies out there that can do every single thing in sustainability and wellness, but there are a lot of us out there that know how to support a client in doing all of that work. And we work together as consultants to do that to support those clients. So I would say the first thing is really reaching out to somebody with experience, with a community of partners and solutions.
Do you have any suggestions on how to prioritize all those needs?
That's a fantastic question. It depends on what's driving them, right? Do they have ESG requirements? Are they in Europe? Do they have the EU taxonomy or CSRD? And I could start going into so many acronyms, we would blind ourselves going through them all. But it depends what's driving them. That's really a great place to start. Sometimes it's just a single asset, and they really care about attracting the right people or retaining the right people. Maybe they're trying to get people back into the office. And so there's not really one place to start. It's again finding out what's driving them, and from there kind of peeling back the layers of the onion to understand what's going to be the best fit and giving them some options to choose from, not just saying, okay, here's the one thing you need to do, but saying, okay, here's a couple options. Which of these feels right? And we can explore the ones that you think might work best for you and your goals.
Jennifer, I feel like we've talked about the global topic of sustainability and well being. Is there anything that we missed that you feel is important to communicate?
Good question. Not that I can think of. You've hit all of my like hot topics in my passion areas. So no, I mean, I think it's just important. Maybe the one thing to address, especially for people here in the US, is to just keep the course. I know sometimes it can be defeating, especially, when you're seeing different requirements that might be going away and different support systems like Energy Star that could be going away. It's really important just to realize that like this has happened throughout history and it will continue to happen in the future. And we have always succeeded at making the world a healthier and more sustainable place. And so it really is our job and our opportunity, as well as our privilege, to continue forging forward and to continue to do this work and to continue to create spaces that are healthy for the people.
Well, Jennifer, it's been my privilege to have this conversation with you. I know you're busy and I know you've got clients all over the world to take care of. So I really appreciate you spending the time to have this conversation and share your insights. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun. I enjoyed myself.